Started. Okay. My name is Kim Hildred, and I chair the Social Security Advisory Board. So I want to say good afternoon and welcome everyone to the board's first session of the fiscal year 2021 IT Systems Speaker Series. This series' intention is to serve as an educational opportunity for board members and the public and inform discussions about SSA's IT systems. Series topics also have relevance to the board's examination of SSA service delivery channels, particularly the expansion of digital services. We are very pleased that our presenter today is Dr. Renny DiPentima, who is the former SSA Deputy Commissioners for Systems, which he served in the early 90s, who since has been sharing his extensive expertise serving on numerous corporate board and advisory panels, including our own Social Security Advisory Board IT Systems Expert Panel. Renny spent 32 years at SSA, rising from a claims examiner to senior executive, and again retiring as Deputy Commissioner of Systems and CIO. Renny was influential in the SSI program implementation and played an essential role in transforming SSA's computer operations from a paper-oriented to a modern online process. Renny also led the development of the legacy system still used today, and he earned a PhD at the University of Maryland. I understand that a number of our IT systems expert panel members have joined us today, so welcome, including panel chair Alan Balutis. And of course, we'll be hearing tomorrow from our systems expert panel on their presentation for their report findings, which we're very much looking forward to. So Renny, thank you for taking the time to prepare and give this presentation. We are thrilled to have you join us today. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kim. It's a pleasure to be able to do this, and I look forward to it, and I hope I hit the right tone as I step through this. Let me just say that as I go through the slides, which will be controlled by one of your staff members, the board should stop me at any point if they have questions, and I'll be able to hear you, and we'll be able to address those questions. For people who are dialed in but not showing up on the screen, they'll find on their screen a Q&A logo down on the bottom. They can write in questions, and one of our staff will be looking and organizing those questions, and I will address them at the end of the presentation if there are any questions that fit that. So with that, let me get started. If we would go to the first slide, assuming that the staff can move ahead on it. Okay. And we can go past this slide, that'll be great. I'd like to start by starting really where the journey began, because the things that our predecessors did back in '37 actually have rippled through to the systems we have today. That structure that was thought about and talked about in 35, 36, and 37 actually still have their influences on us today. And I think it's important to understand that when you understand where our legacy systems are. Our predecessors, as you all know, were actuaries, they were lawyers, hopefully some social policy people there. But in many ways, they structured our system, our program. And I'm always going to say ours because SSA has not left my bloodstream yet. So when I say our, I'm talking about SSA. It was constructed in the beginning very much like an insurance program that we talk about in our report now. There is clear analogies. In an insurance company, you open up a policy at Social Security, you apply and get a Social Security number, which begins your process. In an insurance environment, you pay your premium. At Social Security, those premiums are quarters of coverage that you earn as you work. In a insurance company, you file a claim when you have, in fact, recognized the risk. In Social Security, we do the same thing, with that risk being retirement, survivors, or disability. And you'll find that we have that sort of life cycle throughout. Unfortunately for today's world, back in those days and all the way through, in fact, till today, we didn't think about integrated systems then. Each operation we had sort of stood on its own. So we had account number operations, and with that, we created account number files. We call them Alphadet and Numinent, whether today you're searching them by number or by name. We had earnings, which we have earnings going back to 1937. And we have an earnings file. And finally, we have our beneficiaries, and for those, we have a beneficiary file. So if I was to log on and look at my friend Alan Balutis or Kim's records, I would not see today a single record with, all integrated like that. And I'll tell you why as we go along. So that structure of individual files in many ways follows us today. We can go to the next slide. So you know how we got here. In the early automation, we were very lucky that Watson stepped up at IBM and almost immediately produced the first machines for us. In fact, I believe at Social Security, we still have one of these huge, heavy metal electronic accounting machines. Basically, from 37 to 50, we were using an IBM Collator, a sorting machine. It ran with Hollerith cards, the 80-column cards where you punch out the holes. Our paper, our printouts were on paper. And in fact, in those early days, I know historically that in the nurse's office, the single biggest reason a person went to the nurse at Social Security was because of paper cuts. And we were probably the largest user of paper anywhere, huge, enormous rolls. So it was wonderful, I bet, to have our contract then. The next slide. So the first actual electronic computing device that we used was an IBM device, IBM 604, and it was an electronic calculator for benefits. Now that's interesting because back then benefits were pretty simple, 37 to 50. Imagine our taxes at that time were only $15 a year if you had maximum earnings, and we pretty much had straightforward calculations. We had the New Start beginning in 51, where we did from 51 to the time you were 65, that type of thing. Today, when last I left it, there were over 70 different ways to calculate a PIA, a primary insurance amount, or a benefit amount. And the computers today have to go through all of those calculations to decide which is best for our customer, for our recipient. By 1955, IBM had moved up to a IBM called 705, and that was our first really general purpose computer. And this was embedded into our office of data processing, and it was there to try to help speed up the process. Over the years, then, that was followed by a variety, it says IMB, I'm sorry, IBM larger computers throughout the 60s and 70s. And it was during the 70s that we really started to run into some issues. Let's go to the next slide. The software then were in very simple, almost machine language, assembler language, and Fortran. There was no thought about integration at this point. Each program ran had its own files, its own records. It ran it ran as a separate system. This becomes a problem that ripples through today. So, for example, if I were to ask any of the people watching this, what is the definition of a name? You're the programmer. You're now doing a program, and you get to the definition of a name. Well, you would think a name is pretty straightforward. Actually, by the time I left Social Security, we had 16 definitions of a name. A name, some of the programmers who were working on their program, not worrying about the program of the guy next to him, said a name should be 10 characters for a first name, one character for a middle initial, 10 characters for a last name. So if your name was Christopherson, you became Christopher. The person sitting next to them said, no, I think for mine, I'm going to have 15 to 15. And the person next to them said, no, 919 is fine. So you see, we had definitions, and we even called them by different names. Account number holder, recipient, beneficiary, you get the picture. It was the exact same thing with the Social Security number itself. You would think that there would be a pretty simple definition, but there weren't. There were more than a dozen definitions about what a account number is. In today's world, then, it makes it extremely difficult to start integrating these systems when the basic data going all the way back has different definitions. And we'll come back to that in just a second. Let's go to the next slide. We started to make some breakthroughs when we introduced tape drives into the system. So many tape drives that at just the active tape, the ones we used nightly or during the week, maybe a few monthly tapes, would fill up 2 football fields in the operations building. In fact, the people working on these tapes used golf carts to go around, collect the tapes to run it. And of course, that is, and I'll come to this later, if we had 100,000 transactions today coming into the system, we would run all 80 million beneficiaries on their tape to find 100,000 that we had to update, right? So you're in a tape environment, you're hanging and running tapes, which you can only probably do 2 or 3 times a week, so that you had to run through every record in order to find the ones that you now are adding new or updating. Very labor intensive, very labor intensive. It was at about this time that we also began with the Bureau of Automated Data Processing. So we actually started to recognize that we should have a data processing operation. If there's any questions so far, I'm happy to stop, and if not, I'm going to move along. Next slide. Our crisis really started to develop in 74 and 75 with the advent of the SSI systems. For SSA, we were always the good guys. Our customers came in 60 or 90 days before they were going to retire. We didn't pay a check until the month after the month they were 65. So we had plenty of time. We had 60, 90, 120 days to get all of this paper, which I'll describe later, all of this paper processed. All of a sudden, in comes SSI, and the people coming into our office, they needed their money right then and there. They came into the office because they were in an immediate need. And this Frederick Taylor paper production line that might take weeks and months to go from application to adjudication, that just wasn't going to cut it. And this was the first time that we started to realize the real weaknesses in our SSA automated systems, um, built for Title II and not responsive to the person with immediate needs. For example, we had to start a whole new program called one-time payments, so that we actually created a payment for a SSI applicant and took the chance that that was going to be a good application, and we were advancing them the money, hopefully keeping a good record of it, and not likely to recover if we were wrong, because this is the SSI recipient. They wouldn't have the money to pay us back. So, and as I mentioned, the district office and the payment centers were all paper process based. And to give you a sort of view of that, well, I'll come back and show you what that meant for us. But let's go to the next slide. In an office, with our systems, there were 5 steps you needed to go through in order to file an application. We sort of smile at this today, but this was the challenge that we faced. You came into an office and you always saw a receptionist. Took your name, your number, and your reason for being there. You would then walk back to a claims rep or a service rep, who, after deciding or determining that you were there to file a claim, would take your application. Your SSA 1 if you were a retiree, SSA 2 if you had a spouse, C3s if you had your children, but they would take all the paper for that. When they got done with that paper, they would turn around to a clerical assistant, a secretary. That person would create a folder and put all of the information in it, take out a paper bamboo strip, a little paper bamboo strip, type in the individual's name and account number, and snap it into a bamboo strip holder, so that we now knew that we had a claim. That clerical assistant would then take it and give it to a data input specialist. And what that person would do is convert all of the information that was on the application into a data input form. They were experts at that. So they would have to now go through all of the information and put it on a form called a 450. It's never left my mind. And that person finally would give it to a teletypist. We had one teletype machine, Western Union, for every office. And this person would type it in, knocking out all those little confetti type holes, creating these long tapes, running the tapes and sending it to Baltimore. Now, if anything was wrong, and often it was, a day or two later, a message would come back and say, hey, you have inconsistencies. You didn't answer these questions. These 2 questions contradict each other. That would come into the teletypist, who would give it back to the clerical assistant, who would pull the folder, give it back to the claims representative, who would address the problem, give it back to the clerical assistant, who did a new data input, and off it went on the teletype to Baltimore. I think you're getting a feel of why we needed 60 or 90 days. Let's go to the next slide. The first modernization, which has been basically the modernization on which our systems are running today, started in the 1980s. At that time, we had a long and hard discussion with Congressman Brooks. Jack Brooks was from Texas, a dedicated public servant, a very powerful person in Congress, who felt that every agency, when they were going to buy new computers, should open up the computer to any brand of computer. Well, that was a problem for us, because we could buy computers that were compatible with IBM. They didn't have to be IBM. They could be Amdahl's or something else, but they had to be compatible with that architecture because we had tens of millions of lines of code that would have cost literally 50 to $100 million to try to convert those. And we got to a point where we were not allowed to buy any more new machines, unless we agreed to open it up ourselves to the situation, which we did not. Our colleagues at IRS did, and you can look at that case study. It turned out to be a very challenging time for them. We sat with these old machines for quite a while. In fact, the last one that we got while I was there, under this time period, we bought from the province of Quebec. The councils even came to us with certain tags on it in French. Well, this became a real problem because the commissioner, I accompanied him, went to a joint session of Congress between Congressman Pickle from Texas, some of you may remember, Jake Pickle, and Congressman Rangel from New York, who said to the commissioner, your workloads are backlogged. You haven't processed earnings, are almost 2 years behind. What's going on? To which the commissioner said, things will get worse before they get better. That led to us securing from the Congress a $454 million budget to modernize Social Security systems, and it freed us up from any freeze. So here we are in 1982. If Nancy Altman is on, Nancy and I in 81, 82 worked together on the Dr. Greenspan's Blue Ribbon Commission. And at some point I returned here as we got this opportunity to modernize. I returned to Social Security. Next slide. Well, what we did then was put together, as you have to do, an SSA modernization plan. And the plan said, we are going to go through 3 phases. We're calling it a survival phase. Survival with the first rule of medicine of not making the patient any more ill. We try to stabilize our operation, catch up on our postings, those types of things. And we got through that period pretty quickly. The second was transition, to position ourselves to actually be a modern system. Let me give you 2 examples that were important. One was to get all of our data onto computer disks. That was important so that we can move away from the tapes. And in order to do that, so that we could run a process updating our systems every single night. You might say, why is that important? Well, if you are in an online environment, your claims rep, when they look at the screen, may not know whether it is the latest update or you have some transaction in the system waiting to be processed because you only ran every 2 or 3 days. In order to be safe, they would enter the same transaction again and start backlogging the system with these transactions. So it was important that you run on a nightly basis, but you couldn't do that with all of those tapes that you had to hang and pass through all of these systems. It couldn't be done. It could be done if we were on disk and could just randomly access the 100,000 or so transactions that we had to update. So we used this period of transition to position ourselves. Third, then we were ready to move into modernizing the system, which basically is the backbone of the systems that are running today. One of the things that also motivated us at this time is that we did a customer survey. And our customers at the time, 68% of them, said that they preferred to do business with us by telephone. There was no such thing as internet. So your choice was phone, in person, or mail. And they, 2/3, preferred to do business with us by telephone. Well, we could hardly do business by telephone if we didn't have files available to us, online interactive files, because at best, we could say to the customer, okay, I have your question. You're wondering why your check didn't come this month. I will write to the program center and find out, literally write to them on a form called a 555 and try, and then be mailed, and they'll mail me back the answer in a week or two. That wouldn't be really worthwhile. So we needed to get these files online, if nothing else, to also perform customer, to open up an 800 number and do online telephone contact. Next phase. So we set out and said, let's take a very logical approach to modernizing these legacy systems. As I said, the first thing we wanted to do was get data off of the tapes and onto computer disk. When you were on tape, at the end of a tape run at night, someone invariably would take a tape that was meant to be scratched. That meant rubbed out and stored away as an old tape. They would accidentally put it on the table to be filed away, or vice versa. A tape that was meant to be filed away would be put on a table to be wiped out. Net result was your beeper at 2 a.m. would go off, and some programmer would be told your program stopped running. There's a big error in it. If you were lucky, you would say, just drop out the record you hung up on and see if the system will keep on going, and I'll fix it when I'm in the morning. If that wasn't the answer, then you got up and went to work. So we needed to get off of that tapes and onto computer disk, which we have today. We needed to replace those the teletypes. We needed a computer network. You cannot run an online interactive system with one Western Union tape-oriented teletype machine in the back room. So we had a separate program to go out and build a network of workstations on the interviewer's desk. We needed new computer power because we were going to do online interactive transactions. We needed to have the computers to support that. And the 10 old machines we had probably collectively have less computer power than what's in your car today. And if you're walking around with an iPad, an iPhone, or an iWatch, you probably had more computer power on them than we did on these 10 machines. So we had to set out to get new machines, right? New machines, data where we can get to it, get rid of the teletype so people could have access to the computers. All of that is still relevant today. Fourth, we needed to update the way we managed ourselves. We had a new data center, which allowed us to house these more modern machines and to put into place a whole number of at that time, state-of-the-art, industry-proven, state-of-the-art methods for running data centers, which we had a separate program to make sure that happened. And then finally, we had to set out, which was the heart of the whole thing, to develop new systems, software to operate these systems. So we thought this was a very logical approach, and it was. We had 5 specific systems with 5 specific areas of modernization. We had 5 senior level managers in charge, and we set out to put in place the infrastructure that would allow us to be more modern. The very infrastructure that is the predecessor of what we're running today. Next chart. In order to do this, we set up an interagency team. So part of the report you'll hear tomorrow is a recommendation on our part, that on our panel's part, that you take a broad look on how SSA want to do business. Well, we did that in this group. We had systems represented that was responsible for building the modernized processes. We had the operations folks who were responsible for bringing together consensus about how did we want to run our businesses in district offices, in processing centers, in disability centers. We had policy people who made sure that we were consistent with policy, and in some cases, we needed new policy. Or simple answers. For example, one of our big questions were, if we go online into Active, does a claimant actually have to sign an application? And the answer was yes. I got a kick out of it because the initial language said they had a file, and one of our scholars said file comes from phylum, which means you better sign something. It was that type of thing. We had the administration folks involved, the CFO and the administration, because they were going to have to re-outfit all of these offices. They were going to have to do the procurements, to buy the new machinery, and to oversee the contracting involved. And finally, we had the human resources people who were going to have to train folks to do business in a new way. For example, if we opened up 34 telephone answering services, 800 number, largest 800 number at the time, and those people had to be trained of what it was like to envision a client at the other end of that phone and how you dealt with them. Ruth Pearson, her folks, she was the deputy for human resources, did a really great job. One morning we woke up and on the front cover of USA Today, it rated Social Security the #1 organization for telephone answering. I didn't believe it. A lot of us didn't believe it, but they had us ahead of Land's End and Fidelity and companies like that. But it was because each of these team members came with the authority of their deputies to make and bring back decisions. So later on, one example will be when we needed to pick offices to pilot. We didn't spend a lot of time debating on these interagency teams. The Deputy Commissioner for Systems, Herb Doggett, had the responsibility to bring through his representative to tell us which offices he would choose. And that's the way we operated. And again, our biggest problem with software was unintegrated. So let's go to the next chart. We actually built a Social Security office within the operations building at Social Security. It looked like a real office. It was staffed with real claims reps and service reps from around the United States who came in on detail, and cases that were stripped of their identity were actually processed and developed here, interacted with the systems folks sitting next to the operations and policy folks and designing screen by screen how the system would work. At one point, the operations deputy, Herb, decided that it was time to see if we knew what we were talking about, because we thought we had a pretty good system working. And he charged the team to pilot 2 real offices. Take those offices and show us that you can really run a modernized system there. He chose Baltimore downtown and York, Pennsylvania. And we went in and set up these new systems, the 5 that I described, new systems in these offices, and began running them as a modernized office. This was a challenge as we expanded because we could not have a client come into a Towson office in Maryland, which was paper oriented, and later be told that they couldn't go to Baltimore because Baltimore was using a different system. So we built it in such a way that whether you went into a paper office or one of these new automated offices, they all worked together. Once we proved to Herb's satisfaction and to the commissioner's satisfaction that these modernized systems could work, 2 offices were chosen in each region of the 10 HHS regions. And we ran the pilots there until each regional commissioner was satisfied that this was really working well. And then we went on to implement all the offices. One of the first offices we built was on 21st Street in Washington, D.C., because the commissioner wanted to invite Congress people in to see what their money was, what they were getting for the money they allocated. Now, that was a bit of a Pandora's box because as soon as they came in and saw it, they said they wanted one right away in their home districts. You know, and there were 1,400 district offices. So while we thought there was some wisdom, and it really gave us the support we needed, it also gave us some challenges. Next phase. So with this, new process flows, new front end oriented, one person, the receptionist would still bring it back to the claims rep, but they could do it all. And that's the way the systems are today. They had access to the files online. They did not have to wait a week or 2 to get an earnings record mailed to them from Baltimore. They could exercise the right there on their screen. They could take the application on their screen. They could basically did not need to have a data input technician converting what the applications to data because it was going right into the system. They didn't need a teletypist because the data was being flowed right into Baltimore. The front end is connected to the systems on the back end, and because we had moved to during the staging stage, we could run nightly operations. This is the basic underpinning of the legacy systems we have today. Now, of course, we upgraded. At the time we put these systems in place, we were doing 22 million enter buttons a day. 22 million times a day. Claims reps and service reps around the country were hitting the enter button on their machine, which would send a transaction to Baltimore and call up the next screen. What we did then, leave that screen. What we did then to modernize that, we actually started to put computers on the desk, not what we call dumb terminals. You might remember them. You turned them on, it was a green screen with a C prompt. We actually were able to put what are now personal computers on the desk that were able to do all of the checks on edits and the rest right then and there, so that only the finished application had to move on to Baltimore. And so part of modernization, we eventually put personal computers on each desktop, and and ran a wide area network. We also began to build, which we'd like to do more of today, programs such as benefit estimates, employer program checks, that type of thing. And when we got done, the software was online, interactive, running on the network that the network manager had built, running on the computers that the computer manager had acquired, running with the direct access storage devices that the DASD person had, and running the software that the software person developed in a manner that the operations of the data center were trained. Next slide. Over that period, this was the period of the early 90s when we started to finish this phase of modernization. It did not include modernizing the actual disability process, although the Social Security part of the process was automated, namely, take the application and are you insured? But it still required the paper to move on to the state to make their disability determinations. What future modernizations have done, we try to become more business-driven, more customer-oriented, do more integration, inter-agency integration. And by that, I mean, we had to exchange each night with up to a whole lot of state, VA, OPM, IRS, all types of data exchanges, which we did every night. This was the basis, and still is, the basic structure of the legacy systems that we are running today. Of course, hardware has been upgraded, data storage has been upgraded over time, computers on the desktop have been upgraded, but the basic structure is the structure I have just led you through, and a basic way of doing business in our district offices and program centers is the way I've just described. Let's go to the next chart. And this is some useful resources you might find. Let's go to the next chart. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Alan Balutis for a discussion of where we are with modernization today with the 2017 modernization plan that is basically now a modernized continuation from this legacy system that was in place. Alan, if you would take over, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Rennie. That was a fascinating trip down memory lane to give everybody the background of how we came to where we are today. So I will discuss this very quickly so we still have time for questions from the board members. But as you noted, the modernization plan was updated. The 2017 plan was updated when Rajiv Mathur recently left the agency, came in as the CIO, and although it was less of a plan, but more of a series of specific initiatives, some short-term focused on customer service, some longer term continuing the effort to update hardware and software. When Commissioner Saul joined and became the new commissioner, he made clear that his major focus was to be on customer service. So to some extent, the plan fell by the wayside, or rather was kind of chopped up to pull out those elements that would fit under the customer service rubric. and those became the immediate focus. And the other pieces that were longer term being more than a year, became the elements of a revamped modernization plan. And then, of course, came the pandemic and the closure of the agency and the closure of all the district offices, which created kind of a time tunnel phenomena in which the IT shop moved quickly to put many more applications online that could be put online, so that citizens could still receive services since they couldn't go into the offices anymore. And to put some greater emphasis on upgrading the capacity of SSA employees to work from their home. Previously, and we'll deal with this a little bit more tomorrow, telework was viewed as a privilege for only a small subset of the total SSA workforce. And it was limited not only in terms of the number of people, but the amount of time. So a person might be able to telework 1 day a week or 1 day of pay period. And now you had, instead of 18 or 20,000 employees working 1 day a week or 1 day every 2 weeks from their home, you now had all 60,000+ employees in the agency working from home, which put a great strain on the system. But their response to that was to basically upgrade the existing infrastructure. And the existing infrastructure, in most cases, is at least 5 to 6 years old in terms of what people have on their desktop if they were in the office. I don't know if there's one more slide after this.
There is, Alan.
Or not.
Can we go to the next? There we go.
Yeah. So I think we're into this last phase in clients in terms of, as I said, CIO shop trying to move everything to an app that can be put on an app. And that's a subset of the full array of services. A great emphasis on service to the citizen, but trying to move from this legacy code to a new modernized application that remains a challenge, as well as upgrading the existing hardware and software infrastructure. And I think with that, given we're down toward the end period, I'll just stop. I'll discuss this in more detail tomorrow, but I want to be sure there's time for questions from the board members and anybody else online from the staff who might have questions of Rennie after his excellent presentation.
Well, this is the end of our presentation, so I'd open up the floor, return it to Kim, and open up the floor if there are any questions. And also, I think if any came in on QA, our staff might have some questions as well. So Kim, I turn it back to you and to Nancy, and thank you for the opportunity to present this.
I don't see anything in the chat area, at least in terms of Q&A.
Well, the Q&A is a separate.
No open questions in the Q port. So
Correct. We don't have any questions at this
board
time.
members.
Well, I have a question to start, if I can, Kim, if that's okay to jump in. First of all, it's great to see Rennie, and I love the reference to 1982 because Rennie was so central to that and so important. So it was fantastic. You know, I have, as a layperson looking at this, it strikes me that one of the challenges, whenever there's this modernization, is, and I love the way you put it, survival and then transition, because you obviously don't want to do anything where you're not going to be able to meet the current, payments. And so the question is, both then and now, how does it work when because at some point, I suppose you have to turn off the old system and turn on the new one. So how does redundancy work? And just, I saw that you with the pilots, there were efforts to make sure everything really worked before you move to it. But if you could talk a little bit about that, sort of when you're ready to transition, how you do that.
Right. Well, it was, we needed to demonstrate and in fact prove that in fact a more modernized online interactive system could in fact be put into place and operated in the 1,400 offices. And that's why we started with Baltimore and New York, Pennsylvania. We went into those offices first of all and refurbished them so that, quite frankly, people were in a positive state of mind, and started to actually take real applications using those systems. There was a big challenge, as I said, to try to make those systems coexist with the system that has not been modernized yet. But fortunately, the people at Social Security, who mostly all internal programmers, figured out and knew how to do that. What we would do then is, to the customer, Nancy, everything was online interactive. In fact, we could even tell them how much their benefit was going to be. And if it was, the case was complete, we could generate the payment media to Treasury. But on the back end, all of that data was kept on a file and reconstructed for each of the back end systems so that they looked like what those systems wanted to see. So if you were the back end MBR system, you were still getting the kind of record that you expected to see, even though it was collected and built in a new, modern, online interactive way. Now, that's a challenge that SSA still has, is the replacement of those back-end systems into more modernized code. They're almost all written in a code called CICS COBOL. And those types of people who know how to do that are becoming less and less. And you want to move to more modern software that can run on mobile apps, and software that are more easy to maintain. Well, also in that transition, that's why we then went to 2 offices in each region to make sure that the regional commissioners had confidence that this system would work for them. And when they saw it working, they got pretty excited about it. And then it became, how quickly could we implement it in every office, which eventually we did over roughly a 1 or 2 year period. I don't know if that answers your question, but it really, you need to really make sure that every single day the system is up and running, and you couldn't afford to bring it down with a little note that said, "I'm sorry, the system's in maintenance today." Unavailable. Yeah. Fortunately, we
and
as long as I was there, I don't recall any time we ever told people we can't support you today.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's an amazing story. And are there lessons from that for this current modernization, or is it kind of apples and oranges because it's switching, to cloud and all these other things that are different from
if I could think of one challenge, and Alan and the other panel members, some of which are on, certainly may not agree with me on this, but one of the challenges is the code that we built basically was all done within Social Security with Social Security people who understood
Well,
the then legacy systems. And where we had contractors, in this particular case, the contractor was Lockheed Martin, we assigned tasks for them to do, certain screens for them to build, maybe certain files for them to structure. But all the integration was done within Social Security, and 90% of the system that was built within Social Security. As I understand it, it's pretty much the reverse today, in that most of what's being built is contract to build. Now I say that in that we got some pretty good contractors out there, like Northrop Grumman and CGI and Aleidos, but it is a different model from when we did it. Basically, an internal Social Security driven activity. And Alan, I don't know if you would like.
No,
to
I think that's well said. It- Partly the federal government has lost its capacity to do much of those things inside. IT skills are in such demand, and private sector can pay so much more that now if you want to get anything accomplished, it's usually through a contract vehicle and bringing in not only a systems, an IT firm to develop the code and develop the application, but also bringing in another IT company to oversee those firms and to play the program management roles. It's a challenge today, and it's a challenge today where so many of the solutions in the new areas are like, I'm going to build an app for that. Well, I mean, that works in a number of things, but it doesn't work to do the massive job of processing for claims and payments to almost a third of the nation. So this will be a real challenge going forward, and it needs to be a real focus in whatever turns out to be a new version of the modernization plan under this current administration.
I hope that answered at least part of your question, Nancy.
definitely. That's fast. This is wonderful presentation. Kim,
I think you're on mute.
Yeah.
Or you were.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I had a couple of questions. One is, from your experience, I think SSA is spending, roughly 1.8 billion on contractors now, compared to roughly a budget of about 12.4 billion administrative budget. Has that historically been about, has that percentage on contractors, in your experience, basically stayed the same, even though their functions may have changed? And can you speak to SSA's oversight of the contractors?
Well, on your first thing, when I was there as the deputy commissioner, our Social Security budget over the years was between 6 and 8 billion.
Wow.
Not, obviously not benefits, which were hundreds of it, but our administrative cost was 6 to 8 billion, and the systems cost of that was about $1 billion. So it would be, I think, roughly the same magnitude today. Today, I think we've already covered that the challenge today is to have that same, don't want to put too fine a point on it, but have that same identity with the mission and the customer when you're doing it with contractors, and as opposed to doing it internally. Now, if I was there, I definitely would be doing it with contractors for all the reasons that Alan said. But part of it though is to make sure that you have oversight. You may have a program manager, a company to help you do that, but ultimately it's the responsibility of the agency management to make sure that the programs are going correctly, and make sure that what's being built by various different contractors are integrated and consistent, which means you have to be very careful and concise about the task orders you give them, because basically this all has to fit together. DOD is very good at this, Kim. They can build a tank with parts made by 40 different companies, and they all seem to fit together because their specs are generally excellent. It's no different in building software systems as well. So I understand the use of contractors. I would be doing it myself, but we have to recognize it's a different challenge than what we faced back in 1990.
Right. And then, SSA I know is challenged because challenged for many reasons, but from a technology perspective, they're modernizing the plane while it's flying, right?
Yes.
And so I'm just wondering about, from your perspective or Alan's or the panels, in terms of, how are they doing? They've got so many challenges that they're facing, even on an IT perspective. What kind of progress are they making to modernize those legacy systems? And are you confident that those will be able to be retired?
Alan, do you want to start on that?
No, I'm going to defer.
I don't want to put you on the spot.
No, I'm going to defer to you on this one as the creator of so many of these systems. Right. And we know they're legacy systems because they actually work well. Right.
I mean, this goes back to a part of Nancy's question. And it is the image you said where you start off on the East Coast with a 727 and you want to land on the West Coast in a 747, and somehow in between you're changing from one to the other without hurting anyone. It really is the correct analogy. But those back end systems eventually have to be modernized, and we know how to do that. We know how to do that. But what's important is to have the right, well thought out architectures, because you're going to want to have not only everything as much as possible online interactive, but you need to have mobile apps. You need to be able to reach out to the customer. You have to be able to be in a way that the customer can do a lot of the activity themselves. Those back-end systems, in my opinion, still have a lot of work ahead of them. The disability system, which I think we're in our third try on that, has to be addressed. That's not an easy activity, although I think that the current team has made some very good process under Sean Brune and under Rajiv. But without a doubt, that is a very big area that has to be worked on, and to make sure it can support the modern requirements that our clients have, which are in a large part built around being able to get onto their Mac or their Dell computer, or onto their iPhone, or onto their Galaxy or their iPad, and do business with us.
I would just add that SSA is not unique in this regard. If you look across government, if you look at other agencies, Veterans Affairs, especially in the healthcare area, the Internal Revenue Service, the National Weather Service, these are all vital activities citizens rely on them day to day. The Federal Aviation Administration with their with their flight modernization efforts. So, and most of them have gone through the same experience that SSA has, in the sense of there have been at least a couple of previous efforts to modernize and upgrade and replace those old legacy systems. And there's not there's not an overwhelming record of success in the government in this regard. And this leads to the problems of major investments, little in the way of positive change in outcomes, extensive oversight hearings, but yet the challenge remains. So I think what we tried to do, and we'll talk more about this tomorrow, is how can you manage, how can you improve management to ensure a greater likelihood of success in this important area. And that's so many of our recommendations focused on the strategy, the management, the program management, the integration across the silos at SSA to deal with some of the existing challenges, but to improve the likelihood that this modernization effort will be more likely to succeed for the agency, for the citizen, and for the nation.
I would
So
add to that, Kim, that while it's a systems modernization, it really has to be an agency modernization. This really has to be driven, and I think we say so in our report, with a view to how does the agency wish to do business, and also what is its greater responsibility to the government community at large. Social Security interfaces with a huge number of other agencies, and are we here? One of the questions I think Alan will probably address tomorrow is, are we here just to modernize Social Security, or do we have a broader responsibility to see how we fit into the larger government picture? But in either event, this has to be, well, call it systems modernization, but this has to be an agency driven by an agency view of how they wish to do work, how they wish to work with their customers.
So I have a question about all of these bits of information or descriptions of the problem of modernization. As Alan mentioned, the experience of a lot of investment and a lot of strategizing about how to manage the modernization process across different government agencies has not met with such a lot of success. There's been stories of failures along with moderate success that we've witnessed over the decades. But then is there something special about modernization within government relative to the private sector? And in this regard, I mean, the analogy of trying to modernize while the plane is flying, I mean, it to a large extent applies also to the private sector. I mean, companies don't shut down operations as they undertake the process of modernizing their systems in the private sector. So is there something inherently different in the government sector? Is it perhaps that the problems or the solutions that are sought are to problems that are so large in government that they're order of magnitude larger and more complex than the types of problems that are sought to be modernized, or the processes that are sought to be modernized in the private sector? So first of all, the question is there a real difference in terms of systems, incentives, organization between private and government sectors that lead to this issue about, the difficulty, what seems to be an order of magnitude higher scale of difficulty in modernizing in government relative to the private sector?
There are at least two large differences, and then again, I'll invite Alan to add on and straighten me out on this. But one big difference is on the industry side, you don't have to deal with Google if you don't want to. You don't have to deal with Facebook or Twitter if you don't want to. You don't have to log on to Land's End's site if you don't want to. You don't have a choice to deal with Social Security if you're going to retire, or IRS to pay your taxes. So there's a responsibility to us on our part that our customers don't have a choice theoretically to go elsewhere.
The question is whether that's an advantage or a disadvantage, because the very fact that someone does not have to do it with one agency versus another might be an advantage, because then all agencies are competing to get your attention.
It could be an advantage. It all depends on your attitude towards it. If you have an attitude that we have a captured customer base and we can do whatever we want, that would be a fairly bad attitude. The attitude is, the responsibility to us is that we must be there for our customers. They have no place else to go. The second difference is someone like Google, for example, can try a different program and throw it out there almost every night if it wants to. And if it doesn't work because the customers don't like it or it's not working, they can just take it down. They can do very, very rapid development because they develop an application, and they have done this, and they put it out there, and the customers say, yeah, not what we want, we don't really like it, or it's not working the way we want, and they take it down. We can't afford to just put out applications and say, well, if the customer doesn't really like it, we'll take it down. Or it's a big difference, the responsibility we have when you're there to serve a public good. Now, the rest of your question, I think, is an excellent question, which is there something inherent that makes it harder to modernize a system in government than it is to modernize a system in industry? And I'm at a loss to think what that is. Perhaps my good friend Alan can help me here.
Well, I would make 2 points. The second one relevant to the question and the issue that you just raised, Rennie. One, I'll say first, there's an issue of scale for government. I mean, the federal government is, as I used to tell my colleagues in Cisco, a Fortune 1 company. And if you took the 24 largest cabinet level agencies in government, they would all, and split them out on their own, they'd all be Fortune 100 companies in their own right. So, I mean, these are major initiatives. But to get to the heart of your question, Jagadish, if you look at the literature in business and across the IT area, regardless of whether it's public sector or private sector, the success rate in the private sector is no better than government in terms, or government is no worse than the private sector, however the way you want to put it, in terms of these major systems efforts. The success rate is about the same. These are very, very complicated initiatives, but government operates in a public sphere. So we hear more about their failures than we hear about a failure in Land's End or Hershey's or any of the other big companies. These are difficult undertakings, and nobody seems to have cracked the code in terms of success either in the public sector or private sector. And I can point to you to studies by Boston Consulting Group or McKinsey or Pete Marwick in their days that well documented this matter.
Jagadish, do you
I
have
would
any-
appreciate
do you
that.
have a thought about the answer to your question of why there seems to be a difference?
Well,
Well,
if
I
could-
mean, you alluded to the idea that, the clients are captive for Social Security. And so the incentive to actually push for the most modern and best. So the emphasis on customer service is appropriate, I think, because that's what would drive the right incentive for Social Security. But then I think there are parallels between the private sector and the government in terms of what Alan alluded to in terms of the success rate. My kind of overall observation seems to be that government systems are always following upon the private sector's innovations, and they're trying to catch up, because the convenience with which we can do banking, for example, or contract with other service providers, insurance companies, or even transportation and so on, seems to be so much easier relative to what we hear about customer experience with regard to dealing with government agencies, and Social Security is not excluded from that. So this is just a 30,000 foot high observation about the seeming greater advance in the private sector in terms of customer facilitating transactions with customers relative to what we see in the government. And even though the success rate may not be different in terms of the number of initiatives tried versus the numbers that succeed and actually are rolled out successfully in industry, maybe they have the luxury of throwing, so to say, more lead up in the sky such that something will hit. And so they have probably a different approach to modernization, because they can try out many more alternatives, whereas Social Security is bound by the process of developing a budget and a plan for a specific path to modernization, and therefore they cannot diversify their efforts adequately, and therefore they do not meet with as much success, simply because their portfolio of modernization alternatives and strategies are limited because of the budget process and the pre-planning that must be done in order to justify the expenditure. Just some few random thoughts.
That's an
I'd
excellent
like to
point.
jump in on what, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Is that Rennie you wanted to?
No, please go ahead, Nancy.
Well, another difference is, of course, that the federal agencies have to answer to Congress and get their funding from Congress. And I had never heard that story before about that there had to be sort of this competitive bidding where you bought machines from anywhere. I always wondered why, the various agencies couldn't talk to each other. And I guess that's part of their machines, part of the reason. So I guess the question is, how much is Congress sort of mandating different things make it, I mean, how have they been? I know some of the issue has been, that you can't count on the funding. You might get an appropriation one year, not the other year. I think that's been improved this time because Congress has approved some multi-year funding. But how much are restrictions or requirements that Congress sort of parochial concerns create problems, or have they been pretty good? That's sort of whole reaction. Congress is very interested in this. Or have they been constructive or not constructive and hands off and hands on?
The answer is very much so, Nancy. I mean, after I left Social Security, I was the CEO of a public company. If there was a service I didn't want to offer, I didn't have to. If there was a service that I thought didn't give me a real good return on investment, I did not have to do it. At Social Security, I didn't have a choice. As you know, whatever the legislation said, and we have new legislation every year, I needed to conform to that. I being the agency, we needed to conform to that. We couldn't say, well, that particular piece of legislation, that it really is not something we want to do. We think the Congress was ill-informed in saying that they want us to do that. So I don't think we'll do. We don't have that choice. Whereas on the private industry side, I can make all sorts of choices about what I want to or what I don't want to have as one of my offerings. And so, I think you hit it. Your question points exactly at the right difference. We as an agency, government as an agency, we're controlled by the legislation, particularly SSA. We're controlled by the legislation that the Congress has passed, and we have to make it work.
Good point. I know,
Alan may be, Kim, Alan may be signing off in a second or two, so if he disappears, we'll
I'll
know
try
that-
not to panic.
No, I'm going to be looking for the forthcoming journal article from Jagadish on this issue. Now that we've given him the inspiration,
And I'd love to see it too. So lots of us interested in
I
it.
can promise you it'll be a very exciting read.
I came out of an academic background myself, although it's long ago. So I would look forward to it, and I'll be the first one to cite it, my friend.
So Kim, I think I interrupted you when you were going to do a.
that's okay. I just want to make sure that I've got everything covered here before we sign off. Board members, any further questions?
I actually have one more quick question, and that is, and I don't even know if this perception is right, but I think it is, that at the very beginning, as your history was wonderful, that my understanding is the same, that the agency looked to the private sector and found that the undertaking was so much larger than anything that was done in the private sector, that they had to really invent a lot of it. And we're really on the cutting edge of technology for a very long time. But then somehow, I mean, they certainly are way behind now. And I don't know whether my perception of the early days was right, or whether it had to do with leadership, whether it had to do with congressional support, or if you have any insight about that, because you would think that the government would be on the cutting edge, given how big the undertakings are.
That's why I showed those history sides, as Alan called it, the walk down memory lane. We were beyond the cutting edge, Social Security and sensors. We had Mr. Watson at IBM building machines specifically for us. The whole procurement process today would probably make that a whole lot more difficult to have that kind of direct one-on-one relationship, or maybe from the business side, taking the risk of building a machine just for one specific customer. But we were on the leading edge. By we knew by when SSI came in, we had lost that edge big time. The day on January 1st of 1974, if you remember, we had to have buses outside our district offices because the lines had gotten so long from the conversion from 3,500 welfare operations to one. What was not something, again, we could say we're not going to do. We did it, and it was tough. We had lost the edge then. I think that in the 90s, by most standards, we were gaining the edge, getting back to being at least state of the art. And the question is, where are we today compared to this, where we think we were in the state of the art? Social Security has done a lot. They have done a lot. But I think you'll see in our report there are still things that they need to do to be back to full state of the art.
Yeah, I think now we define the trailing edge. We're still on the edge, but we're not on the leading edge anymore. And I would just note before I jump off, I did get involved. I usually don't get involved on the operational side of the business, but I did at the request of the SSA IT leadership during the shutdown, when they closed all the district offices, and it was what could the private sector do to help them build up their capacity to move from telework to remote work to support now 60,000+ people working from their home full time. And what they wanted as a solution, whether it came from, I don't think it came from the IT side. I think my read was it came more from the procurement acquisition folks, or maybe even the operations side, was they wanted us to provide the same things they had in their offices when they left. And I tried to explain to them, like, all your things are like 6 years old. This would be like going in to get a new phone and saying, do you have any, like an Apple 5 model? I don't want a 12, I want a 5. And we don't, and being told, like, we don't even make these anymore. So I think there is a challenge in government, not in the IT world, but perhaps on the acquisition side of the house, that needs to be as agile as the other side, for government to step up its game and as Jagadish pointed out, being as responsive and customer focused as the private sector is.
Kim, I would build on that point to close. I would build on that point. The expectations on Social Security that are brought about by what COVID required in terms of remote access. I think many of our customers are going to say, hey, look, I do everything I've been doing everything this year from my desktop, including ordering food from Walmart and ordering everything online and doing all my business. Why can't I have that exact same relationship with Social Security, that I can basically deal with the government the way we have been required to deal during this COVID? I think that's a good probably jumping off point that we can also touch on tomorrow. But it just demonstrates the kinds of new demands that can be put on you very quickly. And if you're not fully state of the art, it becomes very difficult to deal with it.
I hope this has whetted your appetite for tomorrow's session.
It has.
Definitely.
Very much.
And I hope you got all the tough questions out today for Randy.
No.
Well, I appreciate you giving us the time to share
my
this
goodness.
with you, Kim.
Randy, thank you so very much. It's been so helpful. Really appreciate that. As Alan would say, that walk down memory lane, I was laughing. I thought, I remember the strips.
Yeah, you have to remember that to know where we are today.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you both very, very much. We
Welcome.
really,
See you all tomorrow.
yes, and we'll see you.
Oh, thank you.
Board members, staff, and the public, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us, and have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Well, thank you.
Mhm.
Signing off.